The engine's roar ripped through the quiet of Hillcrest Road like a predator's snarl, shattering the pine-scented peace of the late August night. Just moments before, I, Rachel, 28, a third-grade teacher at Millerville Elementary, had been humming contentedly, the warmth of my favorite yellow sundress against my skin, lost in the simple pleasure of an evening stroll. Millerville, Montana, population under 4,000, was the kind of town where kids still rode bikes after dark, and the biggest crime was usually teenage antics near the water tower. My life was simple, fulfilling, days spent shaping bright minds, weekends hiking mountain trails. Tonight, after my monthly dinner with Brianna, a park ranger at Murphy's Diner, I was walking home as I had countless times, enjoying the mountain silhouettes against the darkening sky. The street lights, sparse and casting long shadows, usually guided me past the Hendersons' barking golden retriever, Mrs. Foster's tinkling wind chimes, and old Mr. Peterson's familiar wave. But tonight, the houses were dark, the neighborhood asleep. Until that engine. It wasn't the steady hum of a passing car. It was an aggressive, uneven blast, surging and dropping like a frantic foot on the gas. I turned, a prickle of unease raking my skin, and saw headlights swerving wildly 200 yards back. A dark pickup truck, its height unmistakable, careened across both lanes, tires squealing in sharp corrections, devouring the distance between us. My first thought, absurd in its innocence, was for the wishing tree, the ancient oak everyone tied ribbons to, a landmark of generations, now directly in the path of this reckless metal beast. Then the logic snapped into place, cold and sharp. The truck wasn't just speeding, it was accelerating, its engine screaming defiance, veering directly for the narrow shoulder where I walked. In a sickening lurch, the headlights swung left, then overcorrected, locking onto me. My breath hitched. I tried to leap for the drainage ditch, but my sandal caught on loose gravel, sending me stumbling. The truck was a monstrous blur, so close I could see the crushed insects on its grill, smell hot engine oil and burning rubber. Through the windshield, a face. Slack-jawed, unfocused eyes staring blankly ahead, one hand loose on the wheel, the other cradling what looked like a beer bottle. But it wasn't the drunkenness that froze my blood. It was the calculated trajectory, a chilling precision in its chaos. This wasn't an accident. The impact came from behind and to my left, the front bumper striking me at hip level, launching me weightless into the night. My yellow dress billowed around me, one sandal tearing itself free, and in that impossible moment, all I could think was how exposed I was. Then the pavement slammed into my right shoulder with brutal force, sending me tumbling, skittering across the asphalt. Pain hadn't registered yet, only a profound wrongness, my body a shattered puzzle. A coppery taste bloomed in my mouth, hot wetness spreading across my cheek. The truck didn't stop. I heard its screeching tires around the next bend, the metallic groan of something scraping against the guardrail, before the engine noise dissolved into the distant hum of the world moving on without me. When I tried to move, my right leg was dead, bent at an angle that defied anatomy, my foot twisted backward. My right arm was pinned underneath me, and a white-hot agony shot through my shoulder and chest when I tried to pull it free. Wounded, animalistic whimpers tore from my throat. My beloved sundress, the one my mother had gifted me, was ripped, the tiny flowers disappearing beneath spreading crimson stains. Lying exposed on the still warm asphalt, I choked out raspy whispers for help that vanished into the night. My phone, lost with my purse somewhere in the dark, seemed a million miles away, though my wallet, driver's license face up, lay just 10 feet from me, a morbid detail that screamed, "Identify me." It was Anthony, a local farmer, who found me around 10:15 p.m., returning late from checking on his cattle. His worried face hovered above me as he immediately called an ambulance, then draped a blanket from his truck over my shivering form, repeating, "Don't try to move." The paramedics arrived in a blur of flashing lights within 12 minutes, their efficiency likely saving my life. They stabilized me on the scene before the 40-minute helicopter ride to the regional hospital in Billings, a journey I barely remembered beyond the steady thrum of rotors and a stranger's comforting hand. The next few days were a haze of surgeries and painkillers, but one conversation cut through it all with searing clarity. Detective Benjamin Walsh from the state police sat by my bed in intensive care, his questions precise, his gaze unwavering. He wanted details about the truck, the driver, anything unusual from the days before. "This wasn't random, Rachel," he revealed during our second meeting, his voice grim. "We've been tracking a pattern: young women, usually teachers or healthcare workers, walking alone in small mountain communities across 3 states, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. The profile is very specific, and the targeting deliberate. My attack," he explained, "was part of a coordinated operation, a chilling web woven by at least 4 men who systematically scoped out isolated towns, learning routines, then staging what appeared to be tragic drunk driving accidents. The truck that hit me had been stolen from a ranch near Missoula, its driver, Ryan Marcus, a man with a lengthy criminal record. What truly made my blood run cold, though, were the detailed files found in his hotel room. Photographs of me, taken over weeks, images of my classroom, my house, my regular evening walk. Ryan and his accomplices had been in Millerville for over a month, posing as seasonal construction workers, lurking in plain sight, gathering intelligence, not on construction sites, but on me. The year I turned 45, I was an insurance adjuster in Millerville, Kansas, a town of 3,800 souls where everyone knew your business, and excitement was a lost steer or a high school football win. Nicole, my wife, and I had built a life there over 15 years. Our neighbor, Justin, was woven into its fabric. He lived 3 houses down, the kind of man who'd show up with tools and lumber after a tornado shredded half your garage, no questions asked. When Nicole had an emergency appendectomy, Justin's casseroles kept our kitchen warm for a week. He was at our anniversaries, our 4th of July barbecues, every Christmas Eve since we'd moved in. Justin's farm equipment leasing company seemed like a natural extension of him. He'd transformed his father's old auto shop on Highway 36 into a modern hub for the agricultural community, offering everything from tractors to irrigation systems. So, when he slid into the diner booth across from me one Tuesday in September, that familiar grin on his face, suspicion was the furthest thing from my mind. "I've got a business proposition," Justin said, ordering coffee from Diane, who'd worked that counter for 20 years. "Something that could help both of us financially." His pitch was smooth. His leasing business was booming, he explained, but needed capital for inventory. He was offering select locals a 15% annual return on investments of $10,000 or more. "I'd rather work with people I trust," he'd said, "than go to some Topeka bank that doesn't understand agriculture." The numbers, based on my understanding of the farming industry, made sense. 15% was alluring, far more than CDs, yet not so high it screamed scam. He showed me spreadsheets, growth projections, testimonials from grateful farmers. "Benjamin, Ryan, and Alexander are already in," he added, dropping names of neighbors whose financial acumen I respected. "We're keeping this local." The idea of strengthening Millerville's economy while securing our future, Anthony's college, our retirement, felt like a gift. That night Nicole and I debated over dinner, the low murmur of our son doing homework in the background. The investment would swallow most of our savings, including funds earmarked for a new roof, but 15% returns could accelerate our goals dramatically. We decided to invest $12,000. Justin arrived that Saturday evening, crisp contracts in hand. Nicole signed as co-investor. We shook hands, sealing what felt like the bedrock of our financial security. The first quarterly payment, a check for $450, arrived precisely on schedule in December. The second followed in March, accompanied by a handwritten note from Justin, updating us on new equipment and leases. But the June payment never came. Kayla, Justin's secretary, told me he was out of town, visiting suppliers. A week stretched into 2, then 3. My calls met with increasingly vague assurances about major deals. One Thursday evening in July, driving past his lot on Highway 36, a cold dread seized me. The usual vibrant array of tractors and combines was gone. The building stood dark, empty, a for lease sign fluttering near the road. The next morning, at the county courthouse, I hoped to find some innocent explanation, a forwarding address. What I uncovered was far worse than a failing business. The building had been sold 3 months prior. Justin owned no property in Millerville, and his company hadn't filed any licenses or tax documents in over a year. I called Benjamin, then Ryan, then Alexander. None of them had invested a dime. Ryan had never even been approached. Alexander said Justin had only mentioned it in passing. No details, no paperwork. The testimonials, the commitments, all fabrications, designed to lure me in. Nicole received the news with a quiet devastation more profound than any outburst. Our trust, built over 15 years, shattered. The betrayal was deeply personal, far beyond mere financial fraud. It eroded our faith in the very community bonds we cherished. But the true horror dawned 6 weeks later, with the arrival of the FBI. They told me the story. The street I walked every evening, Hillcrest Road near the Wishing Tree, had been chosen for its predictable rhythm, its isolation, a perfect stage for an attack that could be dismissed as a drunk driving accident. The FBI had arrested Justin's entire network 6 weeks after my attack, preempting what investigators believed would have been escalating violence against women throughout the region. Justin received 25 years in federal prison. His accomplices, I learned, traded shorter sentences for cooperation, unraveling a trafficking operation that preyed on small towns, isolating victims for easy transport. I spent 4 months in physical therapy, relearning to walk with a permanently damaged right leg, nerve damage searing my shoulder. The school district held my position, my hospital room walls plastered with cards from my students. But I knew Millerville was no longer home. The thought of walking those streets again, of passing the Wishing Tree where my life had nearly ended, was a psychological barrier I couldn't breach. 6 months later, I moved to Seattle, taking a teaching position in a large urban school where anonymity felt like a shield, where public transport replaced solitary walks. It was a wrench, leaving the mountain community that had been home, but essential for my recovery. Brianna still sends updates about Millerville, meticulously avoiding any mention of Hillcrest Road or the Wishing Tree. The town installed brighter streetlights and organized neighborhood watch programs. Yet the deep-seated sense of safety, once an unspoken promise, was irrevocably shattered by the grim realization that predators had walked among them for weeks. Small towns, I now understood, weren't inherently safer, just more isolated, more vulnerable to organized predators who meticulously exploited trust and routine. My simple evening walk, a 3-year pleasure, had been a carefully observed pattern that almost cost me my life. The investigation uncovered a detail that still haunts my nights. The network had planned to escalate beyond staged accidents. In Justin's notes, agents found detailed abduction plans, a timeline suggesting I had less than a week before they moved from surveillance to direct action. My attack, they explained, wasn't the culmination. It was their grotesque exit strategy. Most people walk home without plotting escape routes, without scrutinizing every vehicle behind them. But I've learned that some predators study their victims with the cold patience of scientists, mapping routines and vulnerabilities, striking with a precision that makes their crimes appear random, when in fact, they are the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning. I never imagined my neighbor's farm equipment business would be connected to murder. The biting October wind sliced through my work clothes as I unscrewed the gas cap, a familiar ritual under the dim glow of the Shell station lights on Route 47. It was almost 11 p.m., and I'd just spent 12 hours wrestling with old Mrs. Henderson's Buick, pushing to get it ready for her morning doctor's appointment. My fuel light had been a glowering reminder for the last 5 miles, so I'd pulled into the only station open out here, 3 miles past where the town's streetlights surrendered to the vast cornfields. My small Nebraska town of Millerville, population 4,200, was the kind of place where front doors stayed unlocked and kids walked home from school without a second thought. My wife, Nicole, and I had just bought our first house, 3 blocks off Main Street. Life was settling into the quiet, predictable rhythm we'd always envisioned. I, a 32-year-old managing the family auto repair shop, felt rooted, safe. The parking lot was mostly empty tonight, save for my truck at pump number 2 and a beat-up Chevy Silverado, its rust blooming like a disease, parked askew near the dumpster. One of its headlights was a dull, sickly yellow. As I pumped gas, a flicker of movement by the store entrance caught my eye. 2 men I'd never seen before, both draped in dark hoodies, were too close to Ryan, the fresh-out-of-high-school kid usually buried in his earbuds, now backed against the cigarette display. His usual bored facade had crumbled, replaced by a stark, naked fear. The taller of the two, lanky and restless, with the nervous energy of a boxer, grabbed Ryan by the collar, lifting him clear off his feet. Behind the counter, the shorter, stockier man, thick-bearded and hands buried deep in his pockets, yanked furiously at the cash register. I could see Ryan's mouth moving behind the glass, probably stammering that he couldn't open the safe, didn't have the combination. My first thought was a primal urge. Get back in the truck, drive away, call 911 from a safe distance. But then the tall one pulled something from his waistband. Even at 30 feet, through streaky glass and poor lighting, the dark metal shape was unmistakable. A gun. And Ryan, a kid barely out of high school, earning minimum wage, didn't deserve a gun barrel pressed to his temple. Leaving the pump running, I started walking toward the store, my work boots crunching on the loose gravel. I fumbled for my phone, trying to look casual, trying to dial 911 through numb, adrenaline-shaking fingers. The dispatcher answered just as my hand brushed the door handle. "Millerville Shell," I whispered. "Robbery in progress." The phone slipped into my jacket pocket. 2 days later, on a Tuesday morning in August, Special Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI knocked on our door. The robbery, it turned out, was just the beginning of the unraveling. She started with routine questions about our financial ties to Justin, our neighbor who had so enthusiastically helped rebuild our garage after the last tornado, the man who brought casseroles when Nicole was sick. Had we noticed anything unusual about his business? Any odd personal behavior? The question seemed innocuous until she zeroed in. Had we ever actually visited any of the properties Justin claimed to own or lease for equipment storage? That single question chilled me. Justin, it seemed, was suspected of orchestrating a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, defrauding investors across 3 states of over $2 million. But the investigation had unearthed something far more sinister than financial fraud. Those equipment storage sites. Several were actual burial grounds. Justin was now a prime suspect in multiple homicides dating back years. The farmhouse 40 miles outside Millerville, where Justin had supposedly kept combines and irrigation gear. It held the skeletal remains of at least 5 people, all reported missing from small farming communities across Kansas and Nebraska. The FBI had found their personal belongings, unsettling evidence of execution-style killings, and hastily dug graves behind the abandoned barn. Agent Chen showed me photographs of the victims, their faces a blur of unfamiliarity, asking if Justin had ever mentioned knowing anyone outside Millerville. The faces meant nothing, but their stories were eerily consistent. Middle-aged residents of small towns, missing persons cases that had gone cold within weeks. All last seen meeting someone about investment opportunities or business deals. Justin's equipment leasing company, it emerged, had never owned a single piece of equipment. The tractors and combines I'd seen on his lot were either stolen or borrowed from legitimate dealers, a meticulously constructed facade. The farmers who swore by his services were either fictional or coerced through threats. The most terrifying revelation was yet to come. Justin, the helpful neighbor, had been using investor meetings to identify potential victims for something far worse than financial fraud. Agent Chen explained that several of the murder victims had initially been approached about investment opportunities, just as I had been. The difference? They'd asked too many questions, demanded too much documentation, threatened to expose his charade. "You were lucky," Agent Chen told me during our second interview, her gaze unblinking. Based on the pattern, investors who became suspicious or demanding usually disappeared within weeks. My decision to research the property records myself, to expose the fraud through my own digging rather than confronting Justin directly, had saved my life. Justin was apprehended at a truck stop outside Oklahoma City, living under a false identity, still scouting for new victims among the isolated farming communities of the Southern Plains. Authorities found detailed files on dozens of potential investors, maps to secluded properties, and chilling plans for disposing of bodies in various rural locations. He confessed to 6 murders to avoid the death penalty, though the FBI believes the true count to be far higher. He received 6 consecutive life sentences. The $2 million he'd stolen was never recovered, likely spent on maintaining his many identities and the tools needed for his killing spree. Nicole and I had lost our life savings, but we gained something more profound: the searing knowledge that we'd survived an encounter with a serial killer, a predator who had used financial fraud as a grotesque smokescreen for murder. We learned that Anthony, our son, had also been in danger. Justin had been discreetly asking neighbors about our family routines, about whether Anthony walked home from school alone. The farmhouse where the bodies were found was eventually demolished, a gaping wound in the landscape. The land remains undeveloped, marked only by a small, stark memorial listing the names of the confirmed victims. Local farmers still shun the area, the access road now permanently closed by the county, creating a dead zone that serves as a chilling monument to the evil that had festered among us. 6 months after Justin's arrest, unable to live in a community where every friendly face now held a hint of suspicion, we moved to Colorado. Our house in Millerville sold at a significant loss. News of the murders had poisoned property values throughout the area. Nicole found work at a vet clinic in Fort Collins, and I transferred to a regional insurance office, a place where no one knew of our brush with Justin or the investment scheme that had nearly cost us everything. Anthony, with the resilience of a teenager, adapted to his new school, though nightmares still stalked his nights. Nightmares of the man who had helped rebuild our garage, the man who brought casseroles. I understand now that predators can spend years building trust, meticulously crafting credibility before their true intentions surface. Justin had been patient, methodical, weaving a perfect cover story for financial fraud while simultaneously cataloging potential murder victims. The investment opportunity was never about money. It was about finding isolated, trusting individuals who could simply vanish without immediate outcry. Most people invest with friends and neighbors because they trust connections forged over years. But I learned that some cultivate those relationships not for shared experiences, but to create opportunities for exploitation and violence. And sometimes, the neighbor who helps you rebuild after a tornado is actually a serial killer who has been planning to bury you in an abandoned farmhouse since the day he moved to your street. What haunts me most is the echo of Justin's natural, convincing demeanor in every interaction we shared over 15 years. There were no warning signs, no flicker of a mask slipping, no behavior that hinted at anything other than the helpful neighbor we believed him to be. He attended church every Sunday, coached Little League, volunteered at the corn festival with the same easy enthusiasm as everyone else. I never imagined that owning an auto repair shop would put me in a serial killer's crosshairs. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful electronic ding that felt brutally out of place. Both men spun, their movements sharp, predatory. The tall one kept his gun fixed on Ryan, but his body turned, eyes pale blue, bloodshot, pupils blown wide, locking onto me. "Just getting coffee," I said, hands raised slightly, trying to project a nonchalance that felt centuries away. He studied me, the silence stretching into what felt like hours, jaw working as if chewing on invisible gum. The gun in his hand trembled, a minute tremor that magnified into a tremor in my own gut. He had moved closer, close enough that the air around him reached me, thick with stale sweat, cigarettes, and a chemical tang that burned my nostrils. "You're that mechanic guy." My body locked, a sudden cold rigidity. Recognition. This wasn't a random robbery. This was something far worse. "Fixed my cousin's Honda last month." His voice rasped like sandpaper over stone. "Charged him $400 for an alternator." The gun shifted, settling on me, wavering between my chest and face. That alternator failed already. My cousin had to miss work, lost his job, lost his apartment. That's on you. The logic was deranged, but arguing warranty policies with an armed meth-fueled man was a death wish. The bearded one, agitated, kept muttering a name that sounded like Benjamin, tugging at his partner's sleeve, his eyes flicking nervously toward the door. Then, everything shifted. Sirens, distant at first, then growing louder, cutting through the thin air. We all heard them. The bearded man didn't hesitate. He bolted for the door, bags clutched to his chest, knocking over a display of windshield wiper fluid that exploded in a violent splash of blue across the floor. But the tall one didn't run. His angry mask evaporated, replaced by something blank, utterly decided. "You did this," he said, the words a raw accusation. I knew what was coming. Before his arm could fully extend, before his stance widened, before that trembling finger found its deadly resolve, I dove for the chip aisle. I was 32, with knees ruined by high school football, and the first shot hit my lower back, just above the belt line, spinning me violently into the metal shelving. The second struck near my spine as I fell, and then, nothing. Below the waist, a strange, profound absence where sensation should have been. The linoleum was cold against my cheek. Through a gap in the shelves, I saw Ryan, crawling toward the back exit, leaving a trail of bloody handprints in the spreading pool of blue washer fluid. The tall shooter stood over me, confused, as if surprised by the ease, the awful finality of it. I tried to move, to crawl, but my legs were gone. A copper taste bloomed in my mouth, and something warm, impossibly warm, spread beneath me, soaking through my work shirt faster than seemed possible. My phone was still in my pocket. The dispatcher, I imagined, still on the line. The police arrived in what felt like hours, though it was likely under 2 minutes, flashlights cutting through the gloom like urgent lighthouse beams. An officer, mustache bristling, knelt beside me, pressing something to my back, speaking into his radio in codes I didn't understand, but knew were urgent. Paramedics appeared next, their questions a blur, telling me to stay awake when all I craved was oblivion. A young woman with a septum piercing, looking too young to hold such power over life and death, held my hand as they strapped me to a backboard, telling me I was strong, that I was doing great. The next few months blurred into surgeries, medical jargon, and the chilling realization that an incomplete spinal injury meant normalcy was a dream I'd never wake to. They caught them 3 days later, at a motel 40 miles north. Benjamin Garrett, the tall one. Alexander Walsh, the bearded. Their names carved themselves into my mind, occupying space meant for kinder memories. Benjamin got 25 to life. Alexander, 15 years. Numbers that felt both too vast and far too meager for what they'd stolen. Nicole had to sell the shop to cover medical bills, to modify our house. Ramps, grab bars, a hospital bed that transformed our intimate space into a clinical ward. The town rallied, fundraisers at the VFW, meal trains that lasted for months. But there's a unique loneliness in being the object of pity, in going from a man who fixed cars with his hands to one who could barely hold a wrench steady. I still dream of running, of my legs working, of making different choices that night. Maybe I just drive away. Maybe I don't stop for gas at all. But every morning I wake to the same reality. The wheelchair waiting beside my bed, Nicole's forced smile that never quite reaches her eyes, and the bitter knowledge that one Thursday night at a gas station changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who believed our quiet town was immune to such violence. Most people walk into a convenience store without calculating exit routes, without wondering if other customers might be armed. But I know now that evil doesn't respect small-town boundaries. It can roll up in a rusty Silverado and shatter everything you've built, all in the space between 2 gunshots. I never imagined my environmental testing job would unearth a decades-old murder conspiracy. I was 35, working as a state environmental inspector in Millerville, Colorado, a former mining town of 2,400 people. It nestled into a valley where the Rockies formed natural barriers, keeping the outside world at arm's length. This was the kind of place where families rooted for generations, where every secret was town gossip, and the Blackwater copper mine had been the lifeblood until its closure in 1987. My routine involved testing soil and water samples, ensuring old industrial sites met modern environmental standards before new development could proceed. It was generally mundane work: elevated lead, contaminated groundwater from abandoned gas stations. Millerville was supposed to be a straightforward assignment. The Blackwater mine had been sealed for over 30 years, following what official records termed a structural collapse, claiming 3 lives. Concrete barriers blocked the entrance, rusted chain-link fencing still intact surrounded the site, emblazoned with warning signs. My task was to assess soil contamination for a housing development planned for the surrounding acreage. Benjamin Walsh, the current sheriff, met me at the site on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. He unlocked the gate, the rusty hinges groaning in protest as he recounted the mine's history and the tragic 1987 accident. "Tragic business," he'd murmured, shaking his head. 3 good men lost their lives when the main tunnel collapsed. The company sealed everything up rather than risk more casualties trying to recover the bodies. Sheriff Walsh seemed genuinely helpful, providing historical documents and maps detailing the mine's layout. He even offered to accompany me, but I politely declined, preferring to work alone when collecting samples requiring precise documentation. The testing process would span several days. The first day's soil samples confirmed elevated copper levels, expected given the mine's past, but nothing that couldn't be remediated. I worked in a grid pattern, extending from the sealed mine entrance toward the future housing plots. It was on the second day that I discovered it, nearing what maps indicated as a ventilation shaft. My metal detector screamed, pinpointing something large, buried 4 feet down. The readings suggested massive metallic objects, far beyond typical mining debris. I excavated carefully, following strict protocols for potentially hazardous materials, uncovering a vehicle bumper. Further digging revealed an entire late 1980s Ford pickup truck, deliberately buried and concealed by layers of mine tailings for decades. The license plate, though corroded, was still attached. I photographed everything, then meticulously brushed away enough dirt to make out the numbers. A quick check of state records identified the vehicle as belonging to Marcus Thompson, reported missing in 1989, along with his wife, Catherine, and their teenage daughter, Jessica. The Thompson family disappearance had been one of the region's most notorious cold cases. Last seen leaving their home in neighboring Riverside County, supposedly heading to California for a family vacation, their house was found undisturbed, mail piling up, no sign of foul play. The case had eventually faded, most assuming they'd simply started new lives elsewhere. Finding their truck at the mine site shattered that assumption. I called the state police immediately. Within hours, the area swarmed with investigators, forensic specialists, and equipment for a full-scale excavation. The sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop, its siren a dying wail in the crisp autumn air. Sheriff Walsh emerged, a different man from the friendly face I'd seen yesterday. The easy smile was gone, replaced by a grim set to his jaw, his eyes shadowed. State Police Detective Sarah Chen, a woman whose calm demeanor belied an electric intensity, immediately took charge. She marked off the grim burial site, her orders sharp and precise, initiating the painstaking excavation of the truck and the surrounding earth for any clue it might yield. Days blurred into a single focused effort. While I continued my environmental assessments elsewhere, Chen's team worked tirelessly, unearthing the chilling truth. Inside the truck, 3 skeletons intertwined, later identified through dental records as the vanished Thompson family. Marcus, Catherine, and their daughter, Jessica. But the forensic report transformed a missing persons case into something far more sinister. Each skull bore the unmistakable trauma of a gunshot wound. The truck itself showed signs of deliberate concealment, dragged into this forgotten corner before being buried. Detective Chen's interviews were exhaustive, probing every detail of my discovery. It was during one of these conversations that she delivered the revelation that chilled me to the bone. The mine hadn't collapsed in 1987. Geological surveys and company records, meticulously unearthed by Chen, proved the tunnels were structurally sound. The official narrative, a tragic accident claiming the Thompsons, was a fabrication, a deceit designed to explain their disappearance and, more crucially, to seal off the mine, ensuring their secret grave remained undisturbed. Marcus Thompson, Chen revealed, had been a whistleblower. He'd threatened to expose the mine's illegal dumping of toxic waste in its abandoned tunnels, a practice that saved millions in proper disposal costs but poisoned the region's groundwater. Marcus had meticulously documented these violations, intending to report them to federal authorities, a move that would have brought down massive fines, criminal charges, and the immediate closure of the mine. Someone had decided to eliminate the threat permanently. The conspiracy unraveled, layer by corrupt layer. It reached high into law enforcement and local government. Sheriff Walsh's predecessor, Ryan Martinez, had orchestrated the initial cover-up, meticulously weaving the false narrative around the mining accident. County commissioners, mine executives, and state inspectors were all implicated, their complicity ensuring no investigation would ever expose the truth. Chen's probe widened, examining financial records, interviewing wary retirees, and pursuing every whisper of corruption. The scale of it was staggering. Millions in bribes, falsified environmental reports, and a systemic campaign of intimidation against anyone who dared question the accepted story. Then came the seismic shock. Detective Chen arrested Sheriff Walsh. He hadn't merely inherited the cover-up, he had actively maintained it for over a decade. His initial cooperation with me, I realized with sickening clarity, had been a calculated act of surveillance, an attempt to ensure I didn't stumble upon the very truth he was so desperate to bury. Forensic analysis of the truck confirmed it had been moved to the mine site almost immediately after the murders, using the company's heavy equipment to dig the grave, then covered with tailings. The entire operation, a monstrous collaboration between the mining company and local law enforcement. The contamination I was hired to assess was far worse than anyone imagined. The illegal dumping Marcus tried to expose had continued for years after his death, transforming the entire mine into a toxic wasteland, a silent killer beneath the surface. Federal investigators eventually indicted 17 individuals, mining executives, county officials, law enforcement. Sheriff Walsh received a life sentence. The mining company faced billions in cleanup costs and criminal penalties. The proposed housing development, the catalyst for my work, was cancelled. The site was declared a Superfund cleanup, a monumental task that would take decades to remediate. 6 months after testifying, I transferred to a different region. Millerville had become uninhabitable, tainted by the revelation that their trusted sheriff had protected murderers. Their local government systematically lied for over 30 years. That experience taught me something profound. Environmental contamination often mirrors a deeper corruption. The earth itself, I learned, can preserve the evidence of crimes that human institutions strive desperately to conceal. Most environmental inspectors test soil and file reports few ever read. But sometimes we unearth burial grounds that expose the toxic relationship between money, power, and violence in communities that appear, on the surface, entirely peaceful. The Blackwater mine stands as a grim monument, surrounded by new fencing and warning signs that tell only a fraction of the truth. The real memorial to Marcus, Catherine, and Jessica Thompson isn't a small marker at the mine entrance, but the ongoing environmental cleanup, a testament to the truth Marcus died trying to expose. I never imagined joining a Facebook group would put me on a predator's hunting list. At 28, fresh from a brutal divorce, I was trying to restart my life as the new veterinarian in Millbrook, Ohio. It was a town of 8,000, tucked between rolling farmland and suburban sprawl, the kind of place where strangers still waved and new neighbors received casseroles. After 3 agonizing years of marriage counseling and legal fees in Columbus, Millbrook felt like a sanctuary, a quiet corner where I could rebuild. The veterinary clinic on Maple Avenue was everything I dreamed of in vet school, a converted Victorian with gleaming hardwood floors, sun-drenched windows, and examination rooms that still held the echoes of a former home. Dr. Patricia Hendress, the retiring vet, had built a practice where farmers trusted her with their prize cattle and families brought their golden retrievers with equal faith. My apartment, a small 1-bedroom above the bakery on Main Street, offered the perfect blend of proximity to work and distance from my ex-husband's relentless attorneys. The aroma of fresh bread each morning was a quiet promise that life could, once again, be sweet and simple. Nicole, the baker downstairs, always had coffee ready by 6 and never asked personal questions, a kindness I appreciated more than she knew. Joining the Millbrook Community Board Facebook group seemed like the logical next step. It was a place to learn about local events, find recommendations for everything from plumbers to pizza, and perhaps connect with people who knew nothing of my failed marriage or its messy demise. The group boasted 200 members, mostly longtime residents, sharing updates on school board meetings and lost cats. My introductory post was simple, professional. Hi everyone, I'm Megan, the new vet taking over Dr. Hendrick's practice. Looking forward to meeting you all and serving the Millbrook community. Any recommendations for the best coffee shop? It was harmless, the kind of message that should have elicited a few friendly suggestions and maybe a question about pet care. Instead, it generated immediate attention that felt subtly off-kilter. Within an hour, 17 comments flooded in. Most were warm welcomes, but a few lingered uncomfortably in my memory. "Welcome to town, beautiful. You'll love it here if you know how to appreciate the finer things." Another read. "Hope you're settling in well. The Victorian apartments on Main Street are charming, but the locks are pretty old. Might want to upgrade for safety." That second comment unnerved me enough to walk downstairs and ask Nicole about building security. She assured me the front door lock had been recently upgraded and Main Street was perfectly safe. Yet, a flicker of something in her eyes, a slight avoidance of my gaze as she wiped down the counter with excessive force, suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Just keep your apartment door locked," she advised, her voice a little too casual. 3 days after my introductory post, Alexander Smith sent me a private message. His profile picture showed a pleasant-looking man in his early 40s, kind brown eyes, a hint of a smile, wearing a flannel shirt against what looked like a farm backdrop. His contributions to the community group were always helpful, informative, the kind of posts you'd expect from a genuinely caring, long-time resident. "Welcome to Millbrook," his first message began. "I know starting over in a new place can be overwhelming. If you need any help navigating local services, or just want someone to show you around, I'd be happy to help. I've lived here my whole life, and know everyone worth knowing." It was friendly, appropriate, an offer I might have accepted from a neighbor in a different context. The first whisper of Alexander reached me like a cold draft under a locked door. He knew I was divorced before the words had ever left my lips. Then came the chilling specifics: working late Thursdays for emergency calls, my solitary apartment above the bakery, its number etched into his memory, the 7 p.m. homecoming, the bedroom window facing the alley behind Main. "I noticed your lights were on pretty late last night. Everything okay?" A message offered, dripping with manufactured concern. The sentence that followed: "It's not safe for a woman to be wandering around alone after dark in an unfamiliar place. There are people in this town who might take advantage of someone new, someone vulnerable," made the hair on my arm stand up. Vulnerable. The word crawled under my skin like a centipede. I stopped responding, but the messages kept coming. 3, sometimes 4 a day. Each one a thread pulled from the fabric of my routine, revealing an intimacy that felt less like friendship and more like a surveillance report. He knew my Tuesday grocery runs at the IG, my preference for walking over driving, my inquiries about hiking trails in the state park. Then, the tone subtly shifted, friendly offers morphing into veiled warnings. "Be careful of the construction workers renovating the bank building. They've been asking about the new vets, specifically whether you live alone." Another read, "Some of the guys at Murphy's bar have been talking about you. Nothing dangerous, but small-town gossip can get uncomfortable quickly." A tremor of unease became a frantic beat against my ribs. I began to deconstruct my own life, twisting my routine into a labyrinth. Different routes to work, erratic shopping hours, long, unnecessary evenings at the clinic. Anything to throw off an increasingly invasive shadow. But Alexander was always a step ahead. "Saw you took the back road home tonight. Smart choice. Oak Street has better lighting and more foot traffic." His words were a constant reminder that my attempts at evasion only served to confirm his vigilance. 3 weeks into my new life in Millbrook, the vet clinic's security cameras captured something that solidified the fear in my gut. It was a Thursday night. I was monitoring a golden retriever recovering from surgery. Around 10 p.m., a flicker of movement near the back entrance. A figure stood just outside the motion sensor's reach, perfectly positioned to observe both the clinic and my apartment windows across the street. The video was grainy, but the height and build were unmistakable. Alexander. For 47 minutes, according to the timestamp, he stood sentinel, occasionally glancing at his phone, a phantom just beyond the reach of clear visibility. When I finally left through the front, he was gone, but my apartment lights were a beacon visible from his vantage point. The next morning, armed with printed screenshots of Alexander's messages and the security footage, I went to Officer Ryan Mills. He reviewed everything with a seasoned, patient thoroughness, but his expression was a precursor to the cold dread that settled over me. "Nothing here is technically threatening," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Weird, uncomfortable, definitely crossing boundaries, but not criminal. We can talk to him, ask him to back off, but without explicit threats or physical contact, our options are limited." Alexander's messages did stop after the police visit, but the sudden silence was more chilling than reassuring. It suggested an awareness of law enforcement, a dangerous adaptability. He either had deeper roots in town than I knew, or he was far more observant than my already heightened paranoia had imagined. My routine changes escalated into desperate measures: grocery stores in neighboring towns, a constantly shifting work schedule, asking Nicole from the bakery to intercept packages to avoid any interaction with delivery drivers. Then, on a Tuesday in November, during a 3-hour veterinary conference in Mansfield, it happened. My apartment door, meticulously picked, no scratches, no forced entry. Nothing was missing, yet everything felt fundamentally wrong. My underwear drawer, searched and refolded, items subtly out of place. The bathroom cabinet, a disturbing mirror image of careful inspection. Whoever had been inside had spent time in my bedroom, handling my personal belongings with a methodical intimacy that made my stomach churn. The police found no fingerprints, no evidence that would hold up in court. "Could be you're misremembering how you left things," Officer Mills offered, his voice still gentle. "Stress and paranoia can make people hyper-aware of details." But I knew Alexander Smith, or someone working for him, had been inside my home. I hired Sarah Cross, a former police detective specializing in stalking, the next day. Her background check on Alexander Smith shattered the last vestiges of my safety in Millbrook. Alexander Smith was not a local farmer. He was not even Alexander Smith. His real name was Marcus Allen Walsh, and restraining orders against him spanned 3 different states. The Facebook profile, the helpful community posts, the entire persona had been an elaborate 18-month construction, meticulously crafted to build credibility in preparation for me. Sarah's investigation revealed a terrifying pattern. Marcus targeted women in small-town Facebook groups, particularly those new to the area or recently divorced. He researched them for months, mapping their routines, identifying their vulnerabilities. The farm backdrop in his profile, stock photography, the community posts, copied from other towns. Most terrifyingly, he hadn't been alone. Sarah uncovered connections to at least 2 other fake profiles in the Millbrook group. The construction workers he'd warned me about, his lookouts, the men at Murphy's bar, reporting back to a coordinator who orchestrated my surveillance with chilling efficiency. "You were selected," Sarah explained during our second meeting, her voice heavy with the weight of countless similar cases. "New to town, recently divorced, living alone, predictable work hours. You checked every box on their target list." The Facebook post was just confirming what they already suspected about your availability and vulnerability. 3 weeks later, the FBI arrested Marcus Allen Walsh and 2 accomplices at a motel in Kentucky. They found detailed files on 17 women across 6 states. Mine was the thickest, filled with photographs taken from outside my apartment, veterinary records they'd somehow accessed, and a timeline of my daily activities spanning nearly 2 months. Marcus got 15 years in federal prison. His accomplices received shorter sentences for their cooperation, exposing a network that exploited social media to identify and ensnare isolated women in small Midwest communities. The Millbrook Community Board Facebook group had been compromised for over a year, a digital hunting ground for predators. I left Millbrook 3 days after the arrests, driving straight to Oregon, where my sister lived. A city large enough for anonymity, a place where I could breathe again. I sold my veterinary practice to a colleague who had no idea why I was offering it so cheaply, or why I refused to explain my reasons for leaving. Nicole from the bakery still sends Christmas cards, updates on Millbrook, that I read with the grim fascination of a survivor needing to understand the aftermath of a disaster. The Facebook group was disbanded after the FBI investigation. The clinic thrives under new ownership. Life goes on for everyone who wasn't chosen as prey. But I know now that digital communities are hunting grounds, that social media profiles can be elaborate traps, that predators stalk their victims with the patience of scientists, meticulously researching. Small towns aren't inherently safer than cities. They're merely easier to monitor, to control, when you have the right connections and enough twisted planning. Most people join community Facebook groups for restaurant recommendations. I learned some joined to find victims, to identify women alone and vulnerable, to gather intelligence for crimes that unfold over months, not minutes. And sometimes, the friendly neighbor offering to help you settle in is a predator, preparing to dismantle your life since the moment you announced your existence to his domain. The investigation uncovered one more truth that still pulls me from sleep, gasping for air. In Marcus's motel room, agents found zip ties, duct tape, and a detailed map. My apartment, marked. A route leading to an abandoned farmhouse 40 miles outside Millbrook. Sarah told me later, her voice thin with gravity, that based on similar cases, I probably had less than a week before he moved from watching to doing. The towering pines of northern Idaho had been my world for 6 years, their silence a salve after the wreckage of my divorce. At 30, I was the solitary keeper of 50,000 acres, a guardian in a forgotten corner of the map where every one of the 200 souls knew your deepest secrets. 40 winding miles separated us from the nearest town, and the wildest thrill was usually a lost hiker or the whisper of a bear. I knew these woods intimately, every hidden trail, every whispering creek, every pocket where the signal simply died. It suited me, this quiet purpose. Days spent policing campsites, hacking through overgrown trails, and patiently schooling tourists who thought a day hike only needed sneakers and a plastic bottle. Then, in early September, on a routine patrol along the Blackwater Trail, the first hairline crack appeared in my ordered world. I was checking primitive campsites by the creek, ensuring no forgotten embers or discarded trash marred the wilderness, when I saw them, stones, arranged in a perfect spiral, 15 feet from the established fire ring. Each rock precisely placed, a mathematical riddle laid upon the forest floor. Campers occasionally stacked stones, a child's game or a crude marker, but this was different. The spiral throbbed with intent, the stones chosen for their specific sizes and hues, hinting at a knowledge I couldn't grasp. I photographed it, then scattered the stones, dismissing it as some artistic soul's unfortunate disregard for leave no trace. 3 days later, the spiral was back. The very same stones, reformed with the same chilling precision, exactly as I'd found and dismantled them. A shiver traced my spine. This time I left it untouched, instead setting up a trail camera 50 yards away, tucked behind a fallen log, its lens a watchful eye on the silent arrangement. The first week's footage was unremarkable. Hikers passed, oblivious. Deer grazed in cinematic slowness. But the night recordings, they were a different story. Around 2:30 a.m. on the fourth night, something moved through the frame. Too quick, too indistinct, yet large enough to trip the motion sensor. I replayed the segment, pixel by painstaking pixel, trying to resolve the blur. It was human-sized, human-shaped, but its movement was wrong. It didn't walk, it glided, slipping between trees without a rustle, covering impossible distances, and somehow understanding the camera's blind spots remained mostly just out of frame. Over the next 2 weeks, more spirals appeared. 3 more, deep within my patrol area, always in remote, forgotten pockets, always crafted with that same unnerving exactitude. And with them other signs, whispers of a presence that moved through the forest with ancient knowledge. Broken branches pointing directional arrows. Scratched bark forming crude, unrecognizable symbols. Footprints that appeared for a short stretch, then simply vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. The footprints were the most unsettling, roughly human in shape, but their stride length, impossible. 8 to 10 feet across uneven terrain, a superhuman feat of balance and power. I began carrying more gear, a better camera, motion sensors, audio recorders. My supervisor, Benjamin, chuckled, calling it paranoia over vandalism, but he let me pursue it, so long as my regular duties didn't suffer. The real breakthrough came late one September night. I was checking the Whitman Creek area just past midnight when the forest silence was shattered by a sound that turned my blood to ice. Footsteps, paralleling my own, maintaining a perfect, disembodied rhythm just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they resumed. I called out, convinced it was a lost soul, but only the wind answered. This silent dance continued for 20 agonizing minutes, never closer, never further, as if an unseen entity was dissecting my every move with scientific precision. I felt eyes on me, thousands of them, from the moment I hit the tree line until my vehicle finally pulled free of the forest's embrace. The next morning, 2 fresh spirals marked the path of my night patrol. But these were different. Larger stones, more intricate patterns. They incorporated elements that felt like a direct conversation. Small bones, arranged in geometric patterns I didn't understand. Feathers from local birds woven into the stone, almost like a macabre nesting. Pieces of bark, carved with symbols that defied any known script. I reached out to Dr. Sarah Martinez, an anthropologist at the University of Idaho, sending her photographs. Her response was instant and terrifying. The patterns, she explained, echoed Native American folklore tales of forest entities, spirits that walked the line between worlds, guardians or warnings for those who strayed too deep into hallowed grounds. Tribes in the region spoke of watchers, beings who monitored human activity, especially in places of ancient burials or ceremonies. The spirals, the carvings, were their language. But it was Dr. Martinez's next words that truly amplified the dread. These entities, she clarified, rarely engaged directly. They ignored human trespass unless they perceived a threat to the forest or to sacred sites. The fact that this one was actively communicating, escalating its messages, following my every move, it suggested an urgency I hadn't comprehended. My research deepened, fueled by a growing sense of dread. The Pine Ridge area, I discovered, was not just wilderness. It was ancient ground, a burial place for tribal leaders and shamans for centuries, a fact conspicuously absent from any Forest Service training. Sites throughout my patrol area held remains, sacred and protected by both federal law and tribal agreements. The unseen watcher wasn't threatening me. It was teaching me. The spirals were not vandalism, but markers of sacred sites. The carved symbols, warnings, delineating places where human presence was forbidden, or at least should be deeply respectful. I contacted the regional tribal council, laying out my bizarre tale, asking for guidance. Their response was swift and empathetic. Tribal elder Ryan Whitehorse agreed to meet, to conduct a blessing at sunrise near one of the spiral sites. He explained that the Watcher was likely the spirit of an ancient guardian, charged with protecting these hallowed grounds. My willingness to learn, to listen, had apparently appeased it. After the ceremony, the mysterious activity ceased. The existing spirals remained, but no new ones appeared. The footprints, the carved symbols, vanished entirely. My night patrols returned to their quiet rhythm, filled only with the familiar sounds of wind and wildlife. Yet, I continued the protocols Elder Whitehorse had taught me, approaching certain areas with profound reverence, restricting tourist access to the most sensitive sites. 6 months later, I was promoted to district supervisor, my work in cultural resource protection a significant contributing factor. The forest, I had learned, held layers of history, invisible to maps and official records. I still patrol these same trails, but with new eyes, seeing the ancient connections between land and spirit that most never notice. The Watcher taught me that some elements of the wilderness demand acknowledgement, not explanation. That true protection lies in understanding its complete story, not just its biological facts. While most rangers monitor wildlife and maintain facilities, I had been called to bridge worlds, to honor responsibilities that predate government agencies by millennia. The spirals still appear occasionally, beautiful now, not menacing. They are gifts, reminders that the forest holds wisdom older than any human institution, and that stewardship demands a profound humility before forces we may never fully comprehend, but must always respect. The red vinyl booth still smelled of stale coffee and desperation, a scent that clung to Murphy's 24-hour diner, like the Wyoming dust to the highway. At 24, I poured endless cups for truckers and lost souls on Highway 47, a ribbon of asphalt stretching between Denver and Salt Lake City. Millerville, population 3,400, was the kind of town where everyone knew your story. Strangers glowed like beacons, and a declined credit card was usually the peak of nightly drama. From 10 at night until the harsh whisper of dawn at 6 a.m., I circled the counter, a silent observer in a world built for transients. My apartment on Oakwood Drive was a mere 15-minute walk away, past unlocked doors and unfenced yards, a safe routine carved into the heart of a small town. Then came Alexander. He drove for a Nebraska outfit, a regular twice a week, his presence as predictable as the diner's rotating pie selection. But in my second week of March, his amiable inquiries curdled. "You shouldn't be walking by yourself at that hour," he'd rumbled, stirring sugar with an intensity usually reserved for engine repairs. "Pretty young girl like you, living alone. There are dangerous people who pass through here." His words hung thick in the air, heavier than the diner's grease. I dismissed his concern, clinging to Millerville's illusion of safety. Yet a sliver of unease began to prick at me. He knew too much, mentioned details of my apartment I had never shared. Other truckers, seemingly unconnected, echoed Alexander's manufactured concern. Benjamin, whose rig bore a different company logo but shared a similar cadence to Alexander, suggested I get a ride home, having apparently noted my walks down Oakwood Drive. Ryan, another regular, inquired if my family was aware of my nocturnal shifts. It was a chorus, discordant and alarming. They were comparing notes, constructing a detailed map of my life. I started watching them, these men who claimed to be passing through, yet seemed intimately familiar with Millerville's every shadow. They'd huddle when their routes aligned, their voices low, their eyes too knowing. The true scope of their collective gaze settled upon me in the last week of March. A new face, a trucker I'd never seen, drifted in around 2 a.m. He ordered coffee and pie, a seemingly innocuous figure, but his casual questions about Millerville's young women, their living situations, and the town's sense of safety were anything but. When pressed about his route, he offered vague answers, unable to name a single local business. Through the diner's grimy window, I watched him. He sat in his truck, notebook open, meticulously jotting down details between sips of his coffee. A chill, unlike any Wyoming wind, snaked through me. I began my own meticulous ledger. License plate numbers, descriptions, snippets of conversation. A disturbing pattern emerged like an insidious stain. 6 distinct men, all independent truckers, all weaving the same unsettling narrative around my life. The breakthrough, a splinter of ice in my heart, came during a frenetic Friday night. Alexander's voice, a low rumble, pierced the diner's din. He was talking to Benjamin, sharing details about the girl who walks on Oakwood. My apartment unit, the direction I approached from home, they knew it all. The words collection schedule and fits the profile perfectly floated to me, sharp and undeniable. Before their eyes met mine, a sudden, chilling silence. The next morning, I called Detective Sarah Walsh of the Wyoming State Police. Her voice, calm and steady, was a lifeline. She specialized in interstate crimes involving truckers, and my detailed account, the coordinated questioning, the intimate knowledge these men possessed, resonated with a grim familiarity. Detective Walsh spoke of a horrifying pattern. Young women, between 20 and 30, vanished from small towns along truck routes across the Mountain West night shift. Workers, solitary walkers, predictable schedules. It fits a pattern we've been investigating for over a year, she grimly confirmed. Groups working together, tracking potential victims, coordinating abductions that look random, but are carefully planned operations. Under a cloak of secrecy, the state police set up surveillance around Murphy's in my apartment. Recording equipment burrowed into the diner's walls, quietly documenting the truckers' conversations, building a case for federal charges of conspiracy. 3 weeks later, Alexander and Benjamin made their move. They had strategically parked their rigs along my path home, Alexander near my apartment, Benjamin blocking my usual route, forcing me into the waiting snare. Plainclothes officers materialized from the shadows before they could touch me, their arrests swift and brutal. Inside their trucks, the truth was laid bare. Detailed files on dozens of women across Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado, photographs, work schedules, home addresses. The network began to unravel, revealing 17 truckers operating across 8 states, responsible for at least 23 disappearances over 3 years. Alexander received life without parole. Benjamin and 4 others were sentenced to decades. The rest, in exchange for cooperation, confessed to the chilling sophistication of their operation. I left Millerville 2 months after the arrests, the phantom gaze of unseen predators too real to bear. Murphy's Diner, unable to outrun its notoriety, closed 6 months later. Highway 47 still hums with traffic, but Millerville installed new streetlights, new community watch programs, a stark reminder of the darkness that had almost swallowed me. Detective Walsh confided that my vigilance had saved my life and countless others. They had planned to take me on April 15th, exactly 2 weeks after my call. My testimony birthed the evidence that dismantled their network. I still work night shifts, but in a large city, a safe anonymity. Public transit offers me a different kind of freedom. Predators, I learned, wear ordinary faces, their casual conversation a chilling camouflage for intelligence gathering. We, the night shift workers, often worry about unruly customers. But some of us, I now know, are being studied by organized criminals who see our isolation as opportunity, our routines as a collection schedule, and our trust as a weakness. That network had watched Murphy's for 2 years, and I was their primary target, with 2 others waiting in the wings. The hush of Millerville, Colorado, had always felt like a promise, a quiet balm after the wreckage of my divorce, after losing nearly everything to my ex-husband's investment schemes. At 38, the small town seemed the perfect place to stitch a new life, a place where people still looked out for each other, but also somewhere I could bury the humiliation of my past failures. That's why Henderson's Pharmacy, nestled on Main Street, felt like salvation. Clean shelves, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the routine of organizing inventory, processing claims, and handing out prescriptions. It was modest work, certainly, but honest. It let me sleep at night, a luxury I hadn't known through the brutal final months of lawyers and creditors. Dr. Anthony, the town's pharmacist for 20 years, was the pillar of this quiet world. He knew every customer's name, their ailments, their children's milestones. People came to Henderson's not just for convenience, but for his genuine care, a rare warmth in a world that had suddenly turned cold and transactional for me. It was during my second week that the first discordant notes began to play, an off-key rhythm in the symphony of prescriptions. Large orders of pain medication for patients I knew had passed away months ago. Expensive drugs prescribed to individuals who, by local legend, had never had a serious day of illness in their lives. And then, the rows of prepared bottles, gathering dust in storage bins behind the counter, prescriptions awaiting pickup that never came. I spoke to Dr. Anthony, timidly, about these oddities, framing them as concerns about workflow. His response was immediate, sharp. "Patient privacy is sacred," he'd said, his voice laced with an unfamiliar edge. "We don't discuss prescriptions, nor do we question what doctors prescribe. Our job is to fill, not to judge." His reaction felt disproportionate, a shield raised against a casual remark. I chalked it up to professional caution, my own inexperience in the nuanced world of pharmacology. I focused on my duties, keeping my observations to myself, assuming these patterns were likely normal, just unfamiliar to a newcomer like me. Then, in my third week, I found the storage room. Dr. Anthony had dismissed it as a trove of old records and forgotten equipment. But rummaging for inventory supplies, I stumbled upon a different kind of treasure. Boxes upon boxes of prescription medications, tens of thousands of pills, their seals unbroken. These were drugs that had supposedly been dispensed, paid for by insurance, yet had never reached their intended patients. Primarily, they were pain management drugs, anxiety medications, controlled substances with a lethal street value. The sheer quantity was staggering, whispering of systematic fraud stretching back months, perhaps years, far beyond a few unclaimed prescriptions. I pulled out my phone, the flash a stark, unforgiving light in the dusty room, and photographed several boxes, my hands shaking. I didn't yet understand the full weight of what I'd stumbled upon, but I knew, with a visceral certainty, that it demanded documentation. That evening, the internet became my confessor. I dove deep into the abyss of prescription fraud, connecting dots between illegally diverted medications, organized crime, and black market drug operations. The next morning, the air in Dr. Anthony's office was surgical, cold. "Someone has been in the storage room without authorization," he stated, his gaze clinically dissecting my face. "That area," he continued, "contains confidential patient records, strictly off limits." I stammered about inventory, but his hostility remained, a palpable force. "Patient privacy violations," he added, each word a hammer blow, "are federal crimes. Serious legal consequences, criminal charges, impossible to find employment in healthcare again." The threat hung in the air, barely concealed behind the veneer of regulatory caution. It was a warning, stark and unequivocal. Stay away. Keep quiet. And in that moment, I knew. My discovery was significant enough to justify intimidation, significant enough to be dangerous. For the next week, I became a phantom in the pharmacy, a quiet observer. I meticulously documented every discrepancy: prescription orders, insurance billing, the actual dispensing of drugs. A chilling pattern emerged. It was a systematic fraud, fake prescriptions, billing for medications never delivered, controlled substances diverted for illegal distribution. Dr. Anthony, I realized, was colluding with someone, generating fraudulent prescriptions using the names and insurance details of the deceased, of those who had simply moved away. Insurance companies and government programs were footing the bill, while the drugs, the precious, addictive drugs, were accumulating for resale on the black market. But it was far more sinister than simple fraud. Some of the fake prescriptions were being written for names that chilled me to the bone. People who had died under suspicious circumstances. Individuals whose deaths had been deemed natural or accidental, yet who had been vibrant, healthy just weeks before. Margaret Thompson, an elderly woman gone from heart failure, though she'd been dancing at the last town picnic. Robert Jenkins, a farmer killed in an accident, his injuries, according to local whispers, strangely inconsistent with the explanation. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Anthony wasn't just a thief, he might be a murderer. If he was willing to kill to protect his operation, what did that mean for me, now that I knew? My breath caught in my throat. I contacted the Drug Enforcement Administration. Agent Benjamin Martinez answered, his voice a steadying presence as I spilled the terrifying truth. He specialized in prescription fraud, in pharmaceutical diversion. He listened, particularly when I linked the fraudulent prescriptions to the recent deaths in Millerville. What you're describing, Agent Martinez said, his tone grim, could be part of a systematic operation involving both fraud and homicide. Pharmacists who kill patients to maintain fraudulent prescriptions are extraordinarily dangerous. They possess both the means and the access to commit murders that appear entirely natural. The DEA launched its investigation. Surveillance equipment, unseen, became the pharmacy's new silent patron. Dr. Anthony's communications, his financial transactions, were meticulously scrutinized. They began to exhume bodies, the names pulled from my documented list of fraudulent prescriptions. The breakthrough was swift and horrifying. Forensic pathologists found lethal doses of drugs medications Dr. Anthony had ready access to, drugs designed to mimic heart failure, a perfect natural death. Dr. Anthony was arrested at the pharmacy during normal business hours, the sterile glow of fluorescent lights illuminating his downfall. The community reeled. The man they had trusted, the quiet pillar of their health, had been systematically defrauding, diverting, and murdering. The investigation unfurled, revealing a wider web. Law enforcement officers who had dismissed suspicions, medical examiners who had signed death certificates with cursory glances, insurance investigators who had ignored blatant patterns of fraud. A conspiracy that burrowed deep into the healthcare and legal systems, all to protect a murderous pharmacist. Dr. Anthony confessed to 7 murders, a bargain to escape the death penalty, though investigators suspected the true body count was far higher. He had killed those who asked too many questions, who noticed too much, who threatened to expose his monstrous game. The pharmacy closed its doors permanently, a hollow shell where warmth once resided. Residents, particularly the elderly, now faced a 40-mile drive for their medications. The hardship was immediate, a tangible legacy of Dr. Anthony's crimes. 3 months after his arrest, I left Millerville. The town, once my refuge, had become a tomb of secrets. I couldn't breathe in a place where I had unknowingly worked for a serial killer, a man who had warped the very essence of trust to cover his unimaginable crimes. I drove towards Denver, leaving the ghost of Millerville in my rearview mirror, the silence no longer a promise, but a chilling echo. The stale air of Millerville, once a comfort, now choked me with the knowledge of what I'd unknowingly handled. Ghost prescriptions for the dead, some silenced by Dr. Alistair Finch's own hand. Sleep offered no escape. The quiet hum of the small town became a constant, mocking reminder of the horrors beneath its placid surface. It was a chilling education. Healthcare fraud, I discovered, is often just a thin veil for something far more sinister. Those we instinctively trust, those draped in the authority of healing, can wield that trust as a weapon, committing murder with impunity for years, invisible until a pattern screams too loud to ignore. Alistair had extinguished 7 lives, siphoned hundreds of thousands from systems meant to protect human health, and corrupted every safeguard in his path, all while polishing the veneer of Millerville's caring, dedicated pharmacist. Agent Valerius Martinez's voice, though calm, still carried the weight of history when he acknowledged my early documents, my insistent reports. They had been the cold water that broke the spell, disrupting a conspiracy that, in Valerius's estimation, could have festered for years longer, claiming untold more victims. Alistair hadn't been content with his quiet empire of death. He'd been drawing up expansion plans, charting a network of pharmacists in neighboring towns, ready to enfold them into his grotesque fraud and murder scheme. We, the public, implicitly trust our pharmacists. We walk into their spaces believing in their vigilance, their commitment to safety and legality. But my time in Millerville peeled back that comforting illusion. I learned that for some, professional credentials are not a badge of honor, but a license to execute intricate crimes, exploiting the very insurance systems designed to heal and shattering the fragile trust of patients. The medications meant to bring solace, to mend what's broken, can, in the hands of a predator obsessed with profit, become instruments of fraud, theft, and murder. And in that quiet town, they very nearly became mine too.